Launch in. Welcome.
Yes.
To the Hot Mess Mountain Mamas.
Yes. Once again.
Once again. And we had kind of a little bit of a fiasco. I got here an hour ago to record. And a small child exploded. Multiple times. Actually, she erupted. I guess she didn't explode. She erupted.
Yeah.
Several times, and just when we thought, cool, we can like get things under control and Jackie could clean, and I was like, I'm gonna help her clean, and then I'm like, nope, I'm gonna throw up if I help her clean.
Yeah.
It was quite
the episode
yes
of life.
Yes. Truly of life.
Yes.
And if you're a mom, you totally know what we're talking about, where you're like, okay, so I'm just gonna set the child down. I'm going to clean this up, and then the child loses it even more and starts to puke even more because they have worked themselves up so much.
Right.
And so then you're like, well, how do I hold a pukey child and clean up the puke? And now I need to clean the pukey child, and there's puke on the floor, and there's 5 extra children in the house.
Nobody move. Nobody go anywhere.
And then your friend, who is probably the most capable person to help you, can't. She has to step outside to get fresh air.
Yes. All because she got very worked up about something. And when she cries a lot, she throws up.
Yeah. And man, there's a parable in that too, but I don't think that's not really what we're talking about today.
Maybe next time.
Next time.
But it did make us think about best laid plans and setting time aside for something that you really want to do.
Yeah. Like record an episode. For our fan base. And then realizing that like sometimes, especially as a mom, those things just get thwarted. Yep.
Something happened.
Yeah. Hey.
She was sleeping.
Hi.
Did you work yourself up into a tizzy? And now she's exhausted from her tizzy.
Oh.
But, yeah, so that sometimes our best laid plans just don't come to fruition.
Yep.
And so we were thinking of other times when that was true.
Yep.
And reflecting on what does that mean with God's timing?
Right.
Because God's not surprised by
God was not surprised that she threw up all over the floor.
Right.
Or like last episode, so I was telling Jackie this, which I hadn't told her about this yet because there's always life happening. That last episode she came over to record, I was like trying to get water to the stock tank for the animals right before we recorded, or at least start to get the water going because they had like no water. And I got the hose hooked up and the hose was still frozen. And so I just turned the water off because I was like, well, I can't fill it now. We only have this small window of opportunity. These are our plans. This is what we have to do. So I just turned the water off and neglected to actually just go ahead and unhook the hose.
Right, thinking you'll come back to it.
Right, I'll just come back to it in 30 minutes whenever we're done recording, and I'll unhook it at that point and everything will be fine. But I'm pretty sure it was like in the single digits that day.
It was pretty cool.
Or at least like the teens.
And if you watched the last episode, you know that we ended suddenly very abruptly realizing that, it was later than we realized.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, and then that's the other thing that happened, because then I was like, I got to take the girls to basketball. So I actually didn't take care of the hose, which if you live anywhere cold, you know, if you leave a frozen hose hooked up to an outside faucet and you just leave it, the ice creeps in to the faucet.
Yeah.
I burst a pipe. All that to say, I burst a pipe. So our window of opportunity, I took hold of that window of opportunity, but then I burst a pipe, which worth it.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
Well.
Then we paid the local guy to fix it. So, he's getting paid.
Right? Yeah, just sharing the wealth.
Look on the bright side of life.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So, windows of opportunity, like trying to take those opportunities, but then whenever you're thwarted, whenever you sit down to write and you're like, I cannot because, maybe there's chaos happening downstairs with children. Or like for me, I'm going to sit down and do work with my Young Living business, and for some reason, like, you know, the kids bring in a bloody chicken that has been
Yeah,
cooked.
and
And
you're
you're
like,
like, well, guess I'm taking care of that instead of contacting my customers.
Yeah. Or somebody drops a cup and it shatters, or something, you know, things that sometimes now it's not that what you're trying to do isn't important to you, but this other thing has now taken precedence.
Right.
You know, I can't leave a shattered cup on the floor for the next hour while I do what I want.
Right, exactly.
And just tell my kids, try not to step in it. Like, that's not
right,
going to work.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Don't slice your foot open.
Yeah, just stay away. Yeah, like, no. It doesn't work out. So then I think if you have a at-home business or an online business or something where you don't escape from the house,
right,
and have like babysitters or another as your spouse or some other setup in place where you're like, okay, the kids are good and I'm leaving.
Yeah,
a lot of it can get frustrating if you try to achieve something and there's constant interruption to that.
Yeah.
But that's when we're talking about, like, you know, but God's not surprised by that. So then, like, do I trust him with the timing of things? Like, because things don't always happen the way and when I want them to.
So good. I'm sorry.
And
it's just so good. Probably because it's so pertinent to our lives right now. Because I'm like, that is so, like, it just speaks to me. Because I'm like, yep, so true. Yeah. It's not like God's like, oh, look at how she threw up all over the floor. That's tragic.
We're never going to get over that.
Yeah, I saw that one coming. Like, it's like, oh.
Yeah, yeah. Well, right.
And so trusting his timing, trusting, knowing that it's like, he knew that was going to happen. We need to trust the fact that even if we don't know the reasons, because I know some people are like, well, you know, maybe that happened because you're going to be in a car wreck. You know, like those random things.
I don't know.
Which has happened. But I also know that sometimes one of the hardest things is to actually just go, I don't know why this is happening the way it's happening.
Yeah.
But we know that our God is sovereign and he's in control and he has our best interest at heart. And so I am just going to have to blindly trust him.
Yeah.
And not be like, oh, that happened because of ... Yeah. Because we may never know.
Well, yeah. And I do think, like, when and it is a balancing act too of, like, balancing family life with whatever you're trying to do. Like, because I am a writer and I have a book in editing that has been taking much longer than initially anticipated because, sneeze it out.
Bless you.
Because the editor had some things come up.
Yeah.
That caused delay. Then I'm like, oh, she's had it forever. It's taking forever. And then I'm like, well, I'm thinking about her. Like, maybe I'll just go ahead and pray for her. I'll pray for my manuscript. I'll pray for the process. You know, so I'm like, maybe God just really was like, I need you to take some time to pray about all the things, you know?
Yeah.
But the impatient part of me is like, but I wanna see if she thinks it's any good. I wanna see what the edits are. I wanna see, you know, like, I'm so curious to see, and then also what the next step is. And so then part of me is like, well, maybe I'll try and go to a writer's conference or a speaker's conference in the meantime. And then, you know, the timing doesn't work out, or we don't have the money, or we don't have that. And I'm like, well, I'm trying to do things that will help.
Yeah.
And that will, like, help me to gain more education. And, like, once I have that manuscript, like, maybe I'll have a better idea of, like, what the next step would be and how I want to go about it. And then I'm like, but there's all these, like, roadblocks.
Yeah.
You know, and I am like, but then I also have to remind myself that once again, like, God is not surprised. You know, he knows.
Yep.
And then sometimes somebody will publish something or they'll write something that is, like, maybe in the same ballpark. And I'm like,
but that was what I was writing about.
I was writing. Right. Because there's nothing new under the sun, because my ideas were so unique and awesome that totally. Someone could, like, steal it. You know what I mean? But it's not even, you know, but then I have to fight the part of me that's like, well, why is it working out for her right now? Like, obviously that message is important. Like, God's allowing those messages to get out. Why is my message not getting out?
Yeah.
And then you know, then that's a whole other thing of like,
yeah, that's a whole other topic too.
that's a whole other topic because God's like, really?
Should be writing these down.
Yeah. like, yes, because you're so awesome. And I couldn't do anything without you.
You're like, God, look at the talents that I have
I'm
for
like,
you.
Look.
Why aren't you using my talents instead of that like, you're using that person's talents, not mine.
Yeah. And that really can open a door for like jealousy or, you know, discontentedness or woe is meanness or whatever. Woe is meanness.
That's a thing. That's a thing.
So I think when we're not trusting God's timing, it does, and it can open doors to like other things in our heart. And either reveal them or open the door for like a root to kind of get in there of like, you know.
Yep.
But I was trying to do something cool and everyone else is doing it and I'm not. Why is that the case, you know?
Yeah.
But if I remind myself that like God is not surprised. He was not like thrown off.
Right.
Like, oh.
His plan is still.
Yeah, his plan is still in place. And he does have the perfect timing for the journey that he has me and my projects on.
Yeah.
And he also sometimes is like, your focus needs to, like, I feel like he's been really putting it on my heart, like, my focus needs to be him, not what the next step of whatever project can be.
Yeah.
And not be focused on like, well, how can I make money? Or how can I promote this? Or how can I, like, you know, like your shift can get kind of like twisted up.
Yep.
And even though my heart's intention, for instance, with my, you know, and other things are affected, like you know, but it's such an easy example. Like when I was writing this project, like, you know, I really did want to honor God with it and ask him to help me with the words and stuff, and the message, but we can get it backwards if we start to think about like, well, how do I get my thing out to people?
Yeah.
You know, how do I get my, and there is a piece of that, like, I don't want to just write it and then shove it in the closet.
Right.
But if my focal point is more that than just pursuing loving God and trusting him, then I can start to get it backwards.
Right.
And get kind of pursuing the wrong thing.
Right.
Which could actually be self-promotion.
Right.
If I'm not careful, as opposed to seeking God.
Yes.
And I think this, like, man, when I start to think about trusting God in his timing, when I'm not trusting him in his timing, it just opens up the door for so many other things in my heart.
Yep.
That I'm like,
So
okay,
true.
we gotta get back. So we are a little bit of hot messes.
A little, just a little.
Things just don't always happen. And sometimes there's puke and animals to take care of.
Yep.
And
sometimes that's just life.
Sometimes
too.
It's just life too.
Because we live in a fallen world.
Yeah.
And that was the other thing I was just going to quickly mention too, is it's like, sometimes I think that there isn't a deeper meaning behind it either. Sometimes I just kind of go, I think that's just life.
That's definitely true. Yeah.
And we could choose to get worked up about life. Like I could absolutely I could have totally been like, oh man, I busted the pipe and I can't believe I did that. You know, it's like pretty soon you're wallowing in it. And it's like, that's just life.
Yeah.
Like I was doing the best that I possibly could do. And I wasn't thinking completely clearly, but I'm a fallen human. Like, I'm going to keep pursuing Christ. I'm going to keep pursuing doing things the right way. But I think sometimes people get too bogged down and let their brain get too bogged down in the like, you know, oh, now I busted this pipe and now we have to do this, you know, we have to bucket water, or now I have puke all over the floor and I have to clean that up. And if that hadn't have happened, then I could have done X, Y, and Z. And now I don't have time to do all these other things. And I think sometimes it's just kind of like, I think you just kind of have to let it go. And reevaluate and re-go, well, guess that is not happening today. And we're gonna move on.
Yeah. And
Like-
it can be hard, like if you have your heart or mind set on like
Oh
getting
yeah.
something done.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
But yeah, for sure. Like sometimes it's just life. Sometimes you're like, well, kids, kids do the things that kids do.
You know.
Cannot control them, no matter what anybody says.
Yep. Yep. And it really is just another opportunity for you to practice.
Yeah.
Kind of letting those things go that you did have planned.
Yeah.
And going,
Yeah.
that needs to happen another day.
Mm-hmm.
And that might not happen till next month.
Or next year.
Yeah.
Or even sometimes, like with my writing, I think like I can keep working at it. Like there's no reason not to. However, like God's intention may not be for me to get to the next step or the next thing at this stage of my life.
Right.
It doesn't mean that what I'm writing or working on isn't valid and won't be something he wants to use in the future.
Right.
But if it's 5 years from now or 10 years from now, he's still in control and he still knows that, right? Like,
right.
And so, I mean, I hope it's not going to take that long, but there is also a piece of me that's like, what if it does? Like, am I going to be okay with that? Like, is it okay to be like, maybe my primary focus needs to be somewhere else right now.
Yeah.
And I'm having all these interruptions because I have small children and life happens because of small children. But it also can be a reminder that maybe that's where my focus needs to be too, no matter how much I want it to be somewhere else or want to be able to like balance it perfectly. That may not be possible in that stage of life.
Right. Yeah. It's practicing that contentedness.
Yeah.
Of going, I'm not going to get to that.
Yeah.
And what I then should focus on is this little human.
Yeah, this little human. But some of those things can look really attractive. Like if you see someone who's really being successful with their young living and you know that they're doing A, B, C, and D. And you're like, I could do those things.
Right.
Right. Or whatever, or writing. Like, I know that, like, some of these women that I have met in writing groups are, like, going to conferences and they're going to little day Zoom things and, Zoom trainings. And it's like, oh, like, I could do those things, but then life is like, or maybe not, or maybe one, but not all the things,
Yes, exactly. So what I think is fascinating, and I've been thinking about this for a long time, not a long time, maybe the past couple months, all these little trainings that are coming out now, because I've attended several for like network marketers and small business owners and, and they've been good. And I've thought like, oh yeah, that was really good. Those were all good reminders. But as I was thinking about it, and this just popped in my head because it relates to you being a writer, is I'm like, did Tolkien go to writing conferences?
Yeah. I mean, probably not really. I know he had his
C.S.
little
Lewis?
group. Yeah.
They had like their little group.
The Inklings or whatever.
Right. But they didn't necessarily attend these classes or go to these and it's just fascinating to me because I think I kind of look at it as like, I think those things can be helpful. But I also go, you're a talented writer. So if you're a talented writer and God has given you that gift already,
can he use it in spite of not going? Yeah.
Right.
I mean, there's definitely
or is he gonna go?
That,
no, I can't use you yet, Jackie, because you haven't gone to this conference. Like,
what? I know. Right. And I have said from the beginning, like to the Lord and to my husband, like, I can't bankrupt my family in order to be a published writer, right?
We did talk
about
that.
Like, there's got to be a
several
line.
episodes ago. We talked about that with the whole budget.
Like we can't just be like, I'm going to pursue this, no matter the cost. Like that just can't happen.
Right.
So either God has to open other doors, which I think He's perfectly capable of doing if He wants to in His timing.
Right.
Or there's other seasons where maybe that's more possible to do without bankrupting your family. And I was thinking about Tolkien and actually Lewis recently too myself, because I was thinking about like this other fictional story idea I've had in my head for years. And I'm like, I want to, I was thinking about it, how I want to develop the characters to be like, have deeper, I feel like the storyline that is in my head is a little, it's not real deep. Like, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But I was thinking about, like, I want to develop it a little more and, like, bring in some other elements and some deeper character things.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, but that would take so much more time. And then what came to mind is, like, how many years Tolkien and Lewis sat and talked about the storylines that they were working on. I mean, years and years they talked about the characters of Lord of the Rings and the characters of the Narnia series before they ever even wrote it. You know,
that is crazy to think about.
It's like, okay, like, we can be in this big hurry to make something happen, but God might have a different timeline, right? Like, there might be something else. And so those are amazing authors with amazing stories, but they're, and sometimes I'm like, man, I just am not that creative. Like, they have all these creative elements, but then I had to stop myself and remind myself that not only were they sharing ideas with other people who were like-minded, not necessarily at a conference, but just people that they got together with who could maybe ask them questions that helped them develop those deeper character stories and backstories and stuff. But also, they thought about them for a very, very, very long time. Like, they sort of got to know the characters on a deeper level before they even ever wrote it down. And so it's like, oh my gosh, if they were worried about somebody beating them to the punch, or like, I'm never going to get it written, I just got to do it, or whatever, maybe the story wouldn't have been developed as well.
Right.
So it is something interesting to think about too, is like, things don't just happen overnight necessarily, regardless of what it is you're pursuing.
I have so many questions now about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. Like, did they write these books with the purpose of, like, I am going to sell this book, or I'm going to write this book for other people to read? Or were they, like, writing it and developing it because they were like, this just would be super cool, I'm going to write a story about this?
I don't know a whole lot, but what I do know or recall, if I recall correctly, they just got together. I believe it was like a weekly basis. There was a group of them. They were two of the group, small group, and just talked about book ideas and projects they had and things they wanted to work on, or ideas they had. And then they would sort of encourage each other or ask questions like, well, tell me about this hobbit. Like, where do they live? What do they do? Like, what is it? You know, and so then it helps them to develop a stronger storyline. And fill in gaps and holes, because they'd be like, oh, that's awesome. Wait, so what happened to the, I don't
know.
I don't know what happened. And so my understanding was that they just loved writing, they loved English, and they got together and talked about these projects. And then I don't know that they ever thought they were going to be like these big things.
Well, that's what I was curious about. Is like, did they ever think that their books would be turned into a 3-part movie?
Well, and
like,
how
like what?
How popular? I mean, I don't know.
6-part movie for like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Like,
and I don't know how popular like fantasy, Christian fantasy was at that time either. Like, how many readers did they actually think they were going to have? I don't know. I mean, I maybe there were more than I imagined, but I don't think there was like, even now fantasy isn't like a genre that has this like very huge general population following, right?
Yeah,
like,
well, especially I feel like, especially Christian fantasy.
It's
I feel like there's a lot of fantasy out there, but some of it can be super dark. If it's not Christian, a lot of times it's like, we're on the edge of demonic here.
Right.
Like, you're like,
Right, exactly. And so it is interesting to think, I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if they had that, like, I'm going to try to write something that will sell. I know Lewis in particular, I don't know as much about Tolkien, but Lewis had a lot of books that were not well received. You know, I mean, before Narnia was. And Narnia, he specifically wrote for, I think it was his niece.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And so maybe that made the difference, too, that, like, I believe it was his niece. I could be wrong about that, but like it's a girl, Lucy. And so maybe that helped make the difference too, that he had a specific person he was writing the story for. I don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff, but God knew what he was doing.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think that Lewis had said he had actually started developing some of his characters before he even got saved. Like he'd been thinking about it a long time.
Yeah.
So God allowed it to finally come together after he was saved, and it has now that Christian undercurrent that it probably wouldn't have had before, right? Or wouldn't have had before.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just interesting.
Yeah.
Like,
It's super cool.
yeah. What if he had published it 20 years earlier? Well, it might have been a different book altogether.
Yeah.
Right? Or series altogether.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it is really cool. But
Man.
so trusting God's
Cool.
timing.
Yep. All
Any
that
final
to say,
thoughts? Yeah.
trust in God's timing, and
Yeah.
when things happen that mess up what you're trying to get done,
Yeah.
just trust in God's timing.
Trusting that he is not
Not
surprised.
to be repetitive or anything.
Not to be. Yeah. He's not surprised.
Yep.
He is not like, oh no, what do I do now?
Seriously.
Jackie and Becca totally messed it up. Man.
For
Which
real.
is comforting.
Yep.
To think like I really can't mess it up. Like I can delay things if I'm not obedient.
Yep.
But I can't really, if I am seeking God and I'm trying to seek him,
Yep.
even if I make dumb mistakes or do the wrong thing, like I can't really mess it up beyond his like ability. He's like, oh no, what now?
Yeah, now what am I gonna do? He's like, I got it.
Yeah. What
had
was
it the
that
whole time.
like reel or meme or something? And I'm gonna butcher it, but it's something along the lines of when God chose you for a certain task, he already took into account like all the ways, all the stupid things you're gonna do along the way.
Yep.
And it's something along those lines.
Yeah.
But it's like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah,
Which is
thank
so
goodness
beautiful.
for that. Thank goodness for that.
Yeah, it's like that verse that talks about he remembers that we are but dust.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I ever read that, and it resonated with me so much.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, it's so encouraging that
Yeah.
he's like, I gotcha. I gotcha.
It's cool.
Like-
It's cool. You're okay. All right. So hope that's encouraging.
Yeah.
If you have something you're working on and you're really wanting, it's gonna be okay if there's some delays.
That's
it's gonna be
right.
okay if there's some setbacks. You know, keep
Yep.
seeking God and praying about his timing and his direction, and
Yep.
you know.
And tune in next time. Where can we find you?
Facebook and Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on Snapchat now, but I don't do anything with it. So
I haven't either. I think I'm so nervous I'm going to do something wrong.
it's
probably
foreign.
fine.
It's foreign to me.
fine.
I don't know what to do with it.
These old women over here were
Yeah.
like, how do I work this?
What do you do? Yeah. So anyway, and of course we're on YouTube
Yep.
at Becca and Jackie Mountain Mamas, or I think it comes up when you just search Hot Mess Mountain Mamas.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right.
That's
Till
it.
next time.
Yep. We'll talk to y'all later.